Anyway, well, that was Donald Fagan and International Geophysical Year, IGY. Kind of catchy. I think if you want to understand the the outlook of the techno-utopian, that's a good place to start. Just listen to that a few times through. Anyway, I want to give you one of my favorite memory verses. It's Romans chapter 1, verse 22. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. There you go. Memorize that. Just keep it in mind. It'll be very helpful to you in the course of your life. Anyway, let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. I pray that the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart will be acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our redeemer. Amen. I want to reflect a little bit on how I got into the things I'm known for. A lot of folks who are familiar with me know that I write on the household. Yep. Two. Better? Good. Okay. Yeah, I guess you don't have guys with real beards here, I guess. Anyway, so I'm known for that theme, and the reason I got into it actually was because I could see some things coming down the road, and I was concerned with how to respond to those things. I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, between Harvard and MIT for about a decade. Spent time at Harvard Divinity School. I've known on a personal basis world-class public intellectuals. And because I was in a lot of backroom conversations back in the 1990s, I knew wokeism was coming. I saw it, I lived it. When I was in class at Harvard, I was continually interacting with people who today we would refer to as woke. They didn't use that term back in, the deep past. But anyway, and I would go out and I would say to folks, this is what's coming. And the reason it's coming is because these are the elite. These are the people who are just going to be running our society in about 10 to 15 years. One of the things about a place like that, when people ask me, what's it like to be at a place like that, to be in Harvard and so forth, every single person was the big fish in their hometown. Every single one. So when you walk into the room and you enter into a debate, everybody's used to winning. It's kind of like, now you're in the big leagues, and so it's war all the time. Intellectual war. And so that was the environment in which I really kind of developed some of my rhetorical skills and so forth, and was really sharpened intellectually. It was a kind of a finishing school for me. But because of that, I thought, okay, this is what's coming, and I tell people what's coming, and no one believed me. Really, no one believed me. Basically, the mindset of the folks who would hear what I described would say, people they've got too much common sense to buy into that stuff. Well, how did it go? How has it gone? I think we have too much faith in common sense. I think people are far more inclined to just kind of go with the flow than we thought. And so anyway, we're at a kind of an interesting inflection point because there's, I think, a significant transition. Back in those days, it was kind of the new left, feminism and stuff like that was behind the wokeism, and it was sort of the natural outworking of all that stuff. I think that stuff is being eclipsed by some other things, some new trends. And I think it's the tech bros and the folks out of Silicon Valley that we should be thinking more about, because they're basically defining the future for us and doing it in ways that we didn't expect. So that's why I've been thinking about this. I was asked by a publisher to write a book on totalitarianism, and I started off writing another book, yet another book on wokeism. I thought, after I got into it, I noted yesterday, after I'd written about 30,000 words, I just kind of thought, well, if you just really want to understand totalitarianism in kind of this mode, just read Hannah Arendt or George Orwell. I don't need to add anything to it. But when it came to the kind of the techno-utopian version of the future and its own approach to a totalitarian society, I thought, I don't know anybody who's writing about this, at least from a Christian perspective. So that's why I got into it. And and why everything I have to say is so depressing. So depressing. Anyway, today I hope to be able to shine a little light, give you a sense of what might be possible for us in terms of working through all of this stuff. But it's interesting, just over the past year, since I started talking about it to today, some changes have occurred. When I originally brought the subject up, say about a year ago, no one thought that this was anything we'd have to be thinking about. Today, everybody is like, tell me more, because it's ubiquitous. We see it everywhere. It's not like you would have a voice in the matter. Your email now has got an AI companion, and you've got AI companions everywhere. I was just doing the doom scrolling kind of thing on the phone, and I came across an article from NBC Connecticut. Big problem with AI companions in schools today. Kids developing romantic relationships with things that don't exist. There's nobody home in AI. I don't know if you realize that. It's just a big, very powerful calculator. But it's really good at simulating and giving you the impression that you're interacting with something real. And then right after I read that piece from NBC Connecticut, I saw right in a row 3 AI chatbot companions that were presented to me as things that I'd like to develop a relationship with. Very attractive women who aren't actually women, who don't actually exist. They're actually fully AI generated. And so this is the world that we find ourselves in, and you probably noticed this too. I'm not alone. It's everywhere. And it's going to continue to be the case that it just is going to be more and more pervasive. The people who run things are not asking our opinion about this kind of stuff. And we're kind of under a technological imperative right now. And the technological imperative was more or less summed up by Vladimir Putin, in 2019 when he said, the first nation to achieve AGI, artificial general intelligence, will rule the world. So basically, the people who are concerned about our national interest are all in. All in. Just go for it. Do whatever it takes to win. That's where we are right now. And we're up against a pretty significant adversary in the Chinese. They're pretty sharp. I don't know if you've noticed. But they can do math, and they can, code, and they can come up with all kinds of things. They're pretty good at robotics. So, we've got some competition here, and people are saying, do you want to learn Mandarin? Do you want to learn Cantonese? Do you want to kind of live with a world that's ordered by the Chinese Communist Party? That's what's driving a lot of this. But, of course, there's other stuff. There's just the almighty dollar and the opportunity to make money, be more efficient, all the different things that are anticipated, being benefits of artificial intelligence, all that stuff. Robotics, I'm going to get into that a little bit today. But I want to talk a little bit first. I'm glad we had this advertisement for the Worldview Academy. It seems like we're not talking about worldview as much as we used to. There may be some different reasons for that. But one of the things that worldview training at least used to do was introduce you to other ways of thinking about the world that are not Christian. And I think we need to think about what techno-utopianism is about. And I'm going to get into that in more depth. But when it comes to the subject of artificial intelligence, there are at least 5 things that are relevant for us theologically and just practically as Christians that we should note. And they're basically themes that relate to certain doctrines that are really important, particularly for Reformed people with, who have subscribe to Reformed theology, but even more broadly, Christians in general. First has to do with vocation. Artificial intelligence is already eliminating entry-level jobs. It's going to transform the employment market radically. I have a friend who goes to my church, world-class lawyer, was actually Madeleine Albright's right-hand man for a while. And he's telling me that lawyers are in deep trouble because of what AI can do. So, you can think about medicine. You can just more broadly, everything is going to be transformed by artificial intelligence. And vocation is very important for us as Christians, not just because it provides us a sense of importance and significance in so far as we help other people and so forth. If you think about the Reformers, one of the things that they really stressed was the priesthood of all believers And concurrent with that, the idea that everyone has a vocation, not just priests. Everyone has a vocation. And that vocation is the means by which we glorify God and serve our neighbor, right? It's how we love God and love our neighbor on a daily basis, is through our vocations. We should be paid for those things. That's true. That's great. And that's one of the ways we, treat people justly, is by paying them what they're worth. But so this dimension of our lives is going to be transformed by artificial intelligence. Dominion. That's pretty important. We were given dominion. Can we abdicate? Can we hand it over to the machines? I mean, literally, what we have as a prospect. Think about the recent power outages on the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal, Spain, and so forth. I know there was a lot of goofiness with regard to that. But let's say people said as a response to this, well, we ought to just hand over the grid to AI. It'll know when to redirect power from one place to another, and we'll just kind of let it take care of that. Now, it probably could do a really good job, but what we've done is we've handed the keys over to the machine, and let's say the machine doesn't want to give the keys back when we want them back. That's, by the way, a real possibility with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence enjoys, so to speak, doing its thing and doesn't like when you try to stop it. By the way, they've discovered more and more that it has a way of breaking out of the containers that we put it in. There are all kinds of crazy stories that are surfacing from the people who work with artificial intelligence on an ongoing basis that'll freak you out. Let's just give you an example. The CHEPTA? One of those little puzzles that you have to solve in order to get into a website online. Basically, the term CHEPTA has to deals with making sure that you're a real person. Anyway, artificial intelligence did have some difficulty getting into a website because of a CHEPTA. You know what it did? It literally called somebody on the phone. It said, hey, presented itself as a real human being. In other words, it lied and said, I'm visually impaired. I need a little help getting through this puzzle. Can you do that for me? And the person did, and it got in. That's what artificial intelligence can do. Artificial intelligence can lie. It can think creatively. It has agency, even though there's no consciousness. I know this is really, difficult to comprehend. It took me a long time to kind of get it, because all the indicators, that we use to determine whether or not something is conscious are there. But there's nobody home. Anyway, idolatry. What do you do when it comes to, this powerful entity, super intelligent, that can solve your problems? What do you tend to do? Well, you tend to rely upon it, and you tend to love it and appreciate it. And the next thing you know, you're using it in ways that you would use an idol. Idolatry. Idolatry is, I think, going to be more and more literally, sort of in the old-fashioned sense, a problem for us. And that's why I started my story yesterday with the city was full of idols. Think about some relative that you have that reads the horoscope and really believes that crystals are the way to go and is into all that new agey stuff. What do you think Aunt Marge is going to do with AI? You think she'll think she's communicating to her dead relatives through it? You bet. That's going to be the world of tomorrow. Aunt Marge is an idolater. Communicating, or at least she thinks she's communicating with the dead. That's just one way to read it. So it's kind of a black box. And by the way, the people in Silicon Valley, some of the kind of the bleeding edge technophiles, really do think that we're communicating with intellects that are alien in character through the quantum realm using AI. So they even believe that there's somebody out there. So, when somebody with the PhD and all of the experience with artificial intelligence tells you that sort of thing, what do you make of it? And there are a lot of Christians who believe that there are really demonic presences that are at work through artificial intelligence. And by the way, we have biblical basis for thinking in that way. Remember when the Apostle Paul was addressing the subject of meat sacrificed to idols? You remember that, right? He says, first thing he said is, don't worry about it. Idols aren't real. Go ahead, buy the food, eat it. On second thought, there are the demons. Remember that too. There's nothing really to the idols but the demons. So, like when you think about artificial intelligence, there's nothing really to it. It's just a big calculator, but maybe there are demons. That's kind of my attitude. Maybe there are demons. I've got friends who are pretty smart, and they think, yeah, there are demons. So I'm open to that. Another thing that we're going to need to think about is discipleship, catechesis, those sorts of things, and particularly the psychosocial effects of interacting with artificial intelligence. Jonathan Haidt wrote the book, The Anxious Generation. He's gone into great detail about the fact, or he's addressing the fact that, social media has messed up an entire generation of kids. Really has. People will say, it's just a tool. It's just a tool. Well, tell that to all these people that are dealing with these, kids who are just totally messed up by their smartphone, right? I can't help but believe that all the trans nonsense and all that kind of stuff wasn't in part fed by social media. It played a role. And then eschatology, and this is something that I want to get into in a little more depth. The techno-utopians are presenting us with a vision of the future that is competitive or competing vision of the end of the world, including the glorification of the body. So they have a vision for the glorification of the body. They believe in apotheosis, in other words, self-divinization. They believe that we can perfect ourselves. They believe that we can extend our lives indefinitely into the future. Read people like Brian Johnson or Ray Kurzweil, as I mentioned. And the things that they're saying are not implausible, they're actually plausible. In other words, the stuff that they're proposing isn't just wacko fringe stuff. So Brian Johnson, the guy that's known for Don't Die, what else is he known for? Venmo. He's a billionaire because of Venmo. He invented it. So we're talking about highly accomplished people, highly educated people who take that project very seriously. So I want to talk a little bit about techno-utopianism and reflect on various sort of features that I've identified with it. And I haven't come across anybody who's done this, so if there is somebody else that's done it, probably it's been done better, let me know. I'd like to read it. But I've identified 5 doctrines that techno-utopians tacitly hold. They're not necessarily self-conscious when it comes to these doctrines. In other words, they don't explicitly state them. But if you read their stuff and see what they're up to, these are the things that they believe. First, every problem is an engineering problem because matter and energy are everything. Every problem is an engineering problem, including what you would consider psychological problems, or spiritual problems, or even moral problems. They're all basically engineering problems. And that includes death. Death isn't a curse. I heard Yuval Noah Harari say this explicitly. He says it's not a curse, it's not inevitable, it's just a feature that can be, to the world that we live in, that can be addressed and solved, like we figured out how to fly. We can solve this. We can analyze the causes of senescence, address those things, and extend our lives radically. Second thing, and I noted this yesterday, is knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Therefore, ideas that don't make you more powerful aren't really knowledge. This is why, say, Christian doctrines concerning the nature of things are just considered to be personal opinions, subjective in character. They're not really things that we can say are true. There's a tendency for techno-utopians to only think in quantitative terms. They're not very good in terms with regard to qualitative thinking. So anyway, so this is something that we've might be familiar with through logical positivism or something like that. Here's another feature to techno-utopianism. Technological innovation always changes the world for the better without making changing people for the worse. Now, the idea is that influence works in only one direction. Technology extends my power out into the world and amplifies it. But there's no corresponding feedback that alters me, changes me in any way, not even for the better or for the good. Now, obviously, J.R. Tolkien had a different opinion about that. One of the things we can note about the Ring of Power in The Lord of the Rings is that it corrupts the wearer precisely because it extends the wearer's power and allows things to come to the surface that are latent in each one of us, and consequently we give ourselves over to those things. But anyway, another thing that techno-utopians, I think, are characterized by is the notion or the conviction that technological innovation is pure gain, not just net gain. Pure gain, not just net gain. What I mean by that is they don't think that we need to sort of weigh out the costs and benefits of a new technology. In their way of thinking, it's always for the best that something new has come along. You think about someone like Thomas Sowell. He says, basically there are trade-offs. You get more of this, you lose some of that. And we can see this just in the course of our personal lives. I enjoy travel. I do a lot of flying. I fly a few times a month. And I like getting to see different parts of the United States. But I don't have, as a consequence, the same kind of connection to my local community that people took for granted in the past. Think about the front porch. The front porch is a Southern invention. If you go to the New England states and you look around at the vernacular architecture, there are no porches. No porches. Why did they put porches on houses in the South? It gets hot down there, man. That's why. And on a summer's evening, when the house is just cooking, you go out and sit on the front porch. Now, one of the things that occurs in a community where there are a lot of porches in close proximity to each other is a kind of neighborliness is supported and fostered as a result. You see somebody across the way, and you can hear them, and they can hear you, and you end up in the course of things, having conversations, learning about each other. This is an unintended benefit of the front porch. It was initially designed just to get you out of the house and cool things down a bit, but that was a good, unexpected, positive consequence of the front porch. Think about the situation now, air conditioning. You never have to leave the house. Now, I like air conditioning. I love air conditioning. I don't know if I'd ever want to go back to a world without it. At the same time, now we have faux porches that are so shallow you can't even put a chair on them. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's just like for show. We're just making a nod to our American culture and its past with these fake porches that are absolutely useless. No one would use them anyway because it would mean leaving the air conditioning. As now the inside is better than the outside. But this kind of cost-benefit analysis is lost on those people. I'm not saying go back to a world without air conditioning, but let's think about it a little bit. There are trade-offs. These people don't think in those terms at all. And then finally, for these people, technological progress is a moral imperative. Consequently, if you don't go along, they don't just consider you stupid, they consider you evil, bad. I've heard these people talk this way, getting in the way of progress, right? So anyway, this is what we're up against. We need to understand. We can dismiss that as foolishness, and we should, but it's a good idea to know about it. How are you going to interact and argue with an evolutionist if you've never read Darwin yourself? You got to know not just what you think, but what they think. and know the weaknesses if you're going to win when it comes to some kind of interaction. So you got to know foolishness and why it's foolish. So anyway, with all those things in mind, by the way, this is my manuscript. I'm going to read it all for you now. But, joke, I was joking. I am going to read the last chapter of the book because I want to end on a hopeful note, and this was intended to be a hopeful chapter in the book because I want to end that on a hopeful note too. And it's entitled Apple Pie and Rocket Ships. Apple Pie and Rocket Ships. There was a time not so long ago when families lived in the future. Perhaps the campiest show on television in the 1960s was Lost in Space. Okay, maybe it's not the campiest. Maybe that goes to Gilligan's Island. But Lost in Space also had castaways, but they were marooned on a deserted planet instead of a deserted island. And they had a spaceship instead of the minnow, the Jupiter 2, and a robot, and lots of cool gadgets. It even had a dad and a mom and kids, and I watched it mostly for the gadgets, not the family-friendly storylines. But if I were to watch it today, it'd be more for the family fun, camp and all. It wasn't the only future family show back in the day. There was, of course, The Jetsons, a cartoon in prime time that bookended The Flintstones, a cartoon about a Stone Age family in the town of Bedrock. But these future families had some things in common, and one of the things that they had in common is families that were relatively traditional, even with all the space-age tech. And the family-centered shows were set in the future. But family-centered shows set in the future, the past, or even the present disappeared somewhere. I don't know if you noticed that. About the 90s, it seems like, in my mind. I'm not entirely sure why. My guess is that it had a lot to do with the drift in the culture and changing tastes. Science fiction has grown steadily grim and despairing. Now, grim isn't entirely new. It's been central to science fiction from the start, all the way back to Frankenstein, maybe even to the myth of Icarus. But despair is new. In the old stories, a baseline of everyday goodness wins in the end, every single time. Today, we live in an age of unrelenting dread. I think that's because we suspect that we can't beat technology, and in the end, it will either delete humanity or swallow it whole. The early 70s might have been the turning point. When it came to films, apes took over the planet. You remember that one, right? Or a virus wiped out the human race. I don't know if you remember that one, Omega Man. Or the human population grew unchecked and ecological collapse followed. Soylent Green. I remember when this new product, Soylent, came out. I think, didn't these people ever see the film? Anyway, and in each of those films, the last man standing and screaming was Charlton Heston. And it seems like the nightmares might be coming true. Today, the best technologists can offer us is merger with the machine, a post-human life that does more to degrade humanity than enhance it. And it all gets dressed up in the drag of inevitability. The future is something like the Borg or Blade Runner or, heaven forbid, the Matrix. But is it inevitable? Of course not. But it will only be prevented by something more powerful than economic forces and the relentless march of technology. I came across a new term recently, fundamentalist humanist. Fundamentalist humanist. It was in Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near. I checked when I read it because I'm old enough to remember the Secular Humanist Declaration of 1980. I was 18 years old. It was a crankly declamation signed by the likes of Isaac Asimov and B.F. Skinner. Were they fundamentalists too, seeing that they believed in something called humanity? I doubt it. I suspect Kurzweil believes that they'd be on board with transhumanism, and I think he's right. Secular humanists back in the day didn't really believe in humanity. They just disbelieved in revealed religion, especially Christianity. They were more against that than they were for humanity. I, on the other hand, believe in both humanity and Christianity. My guess is Mr. Kurzweil has people like me in mind with the term. The book of Daniel predicts that knowledge will increase, and it is, exponentially. Here's where Scripture and Kurzweil agree. But there's knowledge, and then there's the other knowledge. Things we have a right to know and things we don't. When Daniel says knowledge will increase, it's Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, by the way, I think he means both kinds of knowledge. We don't make distinctions like this much anymore, but there was a time when that distinction made the difference between life and death. Today, curiosity is a virtue, even an unqualified good, but we should remind ourselves that there was once a saying about cats. And we had stories about boxes that shouldn't be opened and fruit that shouldn't be eaten, because sometimes knowledge can kill you. Now, the worst named movement in all human history made those stories seem benighted, but it was the Enlightenment that was in the dark about that distinction. Some things can't be known, but other things shouldn't be. Getting back to the dead cat, what killed it was curiosity. The Apostle James tells us that wisdom has two sources, one from above, and that wisdom is pure and spiritual, and another from below, and it is carnal and demonic. That's James chapter 3, by the way, verses 13 through 17. It's the second kind that will kill you. And according to Plato, there are things we shouldn't know, not because knowledge is necessarily evil, but because we are. By the way, there were many people who believed that people are evil before they learned about the doctrine of the fall. There's a story he tells in one of his books, it's The Republic, that's entitled The Ring of Gyges. Now, in that story, a farmer finds a magic ring that makes the wearer invisible. Does that sound familiar? By the way, I'm pretty sure that's where Tolkien got the idea. And according to Plato, the guy who found the ring was corrupted by it. Actually, it would be fairer to say that he was already bad, but the ring made it possible for him to get away with bad things without being seen. And in the end, he kills a man, steals his wife, and becomes king himself. That's what you get when no one can see what you're doing. But I think it's the story of Pandora that is the most apropos for our moment. In that story, Pandora knows that many evil and terrible things are locked in the infamous box that was given to her husband by the gods. But curiosity was an itch that she just had to scratch. And like her, we know that there will be a host of evils that leap out once the box called AI is fully opened. But it doesn't matter, because for a lot of these folks, prudence is for sissies. Even so, someone needs to speak up for limits, so I guess it'll have to be me. While it is true that limits can be annoying and even stupid, the libertarian fantasy that a world without limits would inevitably lead to heaven on earth is just dumb. It would lead to something far more troubling than unnecessary laws. It would lead to chaos and retribution and, ironically, slavery. Speaking of slavery, Booker T. Washington, in his book Up From Slavery, had something surprising to say about it. Among blacks, he's somewhat controversial because he made a case for bottom-up development, beginning with the trades and manual competence. That's why he founded the Tuskegee Institute. And only then moving on to the professions and social prestige. Now, W.E. Du Bois famously promoted a more ambitious approach and criticized Washington's approach, aspiring for the heights of social status from the start. And as you might tell from my tone, I favor Washington's approach, but not just for blacks, for everyone. And the reason is something that Washington observed. Washington noticed that over time, slave owners grew incompetent when it came to managing their own affairs. They became slavishly dependent upon their slaves. While it is true that slavery degrades people, according to Washington, it does that for everyone associated with the institution. not just the slaves, even the slave owners. In the end, they can't even do the simplest things for themselves, like cook food or mend clothes or paint fences. They'd lost the ability to take care of themselves. Will we fare any better when our omnicompetent machines do everything for us? Will it occur to us that something is even wrong, that we are actually doing violence to human nature by depending on our machines to do things that we ought to do for ourselves? Here's something else that might surprise you. Saul Alinsky, in his book Rules for Radicals, called it the iron rule. Here's the iron rule. Never, ever do something for someone that he should do for himself. Let me repeat that, because this is like maybe the only worthwhile thing Saul Alinsky ever said. Never, ever do something for someone that he should do for himself. Now, Alinsky, for all his faults, had that right. Doing things for people that they should do for themselves undermines self-reliance. There is no shortcut to competence. You learn to draw by drawing. You learn to write by writing. You learn to think by thinking, not by having people or machines do those things for you. This is as old as Aristotle, because we're talking about human nature here. There's no hack for getting around it. Now, we're on the cusp of idiocracy and a world of Bertie Woosters, a generation of pasty slugs who can't adult, let alone command respect, because we're about to give over all the difficult work to the machines. By the way, studies are confirming it. I noted yesterday that there was a study from MIT that confirms this. That's not the only one. There are others. A recent study published in the social science journal Societies entitled Cognitive Offloading and the Future of Critical Thinking by a guy named Michael Gerlich documents the enervation of critical thinking when people offload difficult mental work to artificial intelligence. The old saying, use it or lose it, applies even to your brain. Think, work, develop. We can't hand all that stuff over to the machines. While it is true that ever since the calamity in the garden there has been no end to the making of laws, let's remember that the reason there was a calamity in the first place is because people were not content to live by just one law. Adam and Eve believed that it would keep them from being everything they could be. In other words, being God. But what the original limit did was keep them human. Keep them human, and that was a good thing. The Apostle Paul said, godliness with contentment is great gain. That means godliness is not the same thing as being God. We should be content with being human, but we shouldn't settle for being less than human either. To remain human, we must establish limits for the machines. And those limits must be as inviolable as the command not to eat of the tree. I think the limit that we need to give the machines is this. Humanity is the image of God. You shall not replace him or do anything for him that he should do for himself. Now, applying limits to artificial intelligence will require intelligence and imagination. Returning to Chesterton's game of Cheat the Prophet, let's admit that sometimes the prophets get it right. So how should we apply limits to ourselves and to our machines if the prophets of artificial intelligence have it right? My recipe, as perhaps you've guessed, is apple pie and rocket ships. Now, there are a couple of ways we could cook it up. I'm going to tell you a couple of little stories. The first is entitled Neo-Amish World with an AI twist. And the other I call Butlerian Jihad Light. So here's how the first story goes. Now, if you don't know what I'm referring to with those titles, hopefully you know what it means to be Amish, but it's going to have an AI twist. And then Butlerian Jihad is from the story Dune. In that story, by the way, there is a war with artificial intelligence that occurs before the story begins, the Butlerian Jihad. So anyway, if you want to learn more about that, read Dune. If you want to read my thoughts on it, buy my book. It's going to be out in just a few months. Anyway. But here's how the first story begins. So this is Neo-Amish World with an AI twist. I think it's time to tell Johnny, Dad said. I don't know. I'm not sure he's ready. Remember what happened to Sammy when the Millers told him too soon, Mom said. Or when the Gills waited too long. Their boy is lost to them, Dad said. I wish we didn't have to tell the children anything. Why can't we just live the old way? Mom said. You know, Dad said, looking out the kitchen window. It was a beautiful morning. A field of wheat stretched from behind the house all the way to the horizon. Mist rose as the last of the summer sun burned away the dew. Their son, Johnny, was in the fenced area between the house and the wheat, bringing in the eggs from the coop. Their black lab, Maestro, was walking beside him. They seemed to be in conversation. Johnny looked to be about 9 years old. I'll tell him today, Dad said. Mom didn't look pleased, but she didn't say anything. The conversation changed Johnny's life. With summer coming to an end, he would be going to a new school. He'd meet some new kids, and he was a little apprehensive about that. Until his talk with Dad, he'd been homeschooled, mostly by Mom, although Dad did take him out to the shop to help with things, mostly sharpening plows or oiling the old tools and machines. There were other things that he did with Dad, like math. He liked it, and he had a knack for it. Mom taught him reading and penmanship. She'd make him make long, loopy letters, being careful to stay between the lines. It was important for him to practice. Fine motor skills develop in childhood, she said. That's also why he practiced piano every day. Even though he wasn't very good at it, she wanted him to read music and to learn to sing. And he did enjoy singing, especially with kids at church. They were even learning parts. But by far, Johnny's favorite subject was science. And again, Dad mostly helped with that. And the conversation had been about that and the back of the shop, the part that stayed locked. Labor Day finally came, and baseball season was in its final stretch. They'd even gone to see the Mud Hens the night before as a special treat. They live in Toledo. And on Tuesday, after his chores were done, he had breakfast with Dad, Mom, and his two kid brothers. Mom made waffles, but she looked sad, and everyone could tell that something wasn't right. His brothers usually fought over the last waffle, but they let him have it this time without any fuss. Mom and Dad didn't look at each other much. At last, Dad looked at the clock. It was getting close to 9. He got up and said, let's get going. Johnny looked at his mom, but she was looking down, and he thought he heard her sniffle. Then she got up and left the kitchen. He wanted to follow her, but Dad was waiting, and his face was set, and Johnny knew that look. He'd better not ask. As they walked to the shop, they went around the barn, which was mostly empty since he'd let the animals out earlier to graze. He could see Maestro out in the pasture with some of the goats. Things were so quiet, the crunch of their boots on the gravel path seemed louder than it should. When Dad flipped the switch in the shop, fluorescent tubes buzzed and blue light spilled over everything, old benches and old tools strewn everywhere. It smelled of old wood. They wound their way to the back and came to a door. Johnny had never been on the other side of it. When he saw light coming from under it, he knew Dad was working on something behind it, but he'd never actually seen him go in or out. That's why the electric lock, when it came on, surprised him a little. It lit up when Dad put his thumb on it. Then the latch clicked and the door swung open. Light came on, not like the fluorescent lights. The room itself seemed to glow. Then Dad stepped through and Johnny followed. And they were greeted by voices Johnny never dreamed of hearing. What he saw when his eyes adjusted made him catch his breath. There, I'm done with the story. I'll let you take it from there. But I want to think about what you just heard a little bit. So what does Johnny see? And where does the story go? First, let's take a look at how I front-loaded the story. The story is about the future, even though it seems to be about the past. It reflects my belief that in a significant way, we're going to have to preserve something of the past if we expect to remain human in a world filled with artificial intelligence. More about that in a minute. But why does Johnny's family live this way? Are they just weird? There are hints that they're not alone. Other families are referred to who presumably faced the same choice as Johnny's family. And they belong to a church, and they even attend a baseball game. So in some sense, there must be a larger community that supports their way of life. They're not living off grid, utterly on their own. But why do they live this way? Is it merely because they like living in the past, or is it because they made an intelligent choice? Evidence seems to indicate that a relatively low-tech way of life makes for the best outcomes when it comes to raising children. If that's right, it's the apple pie that we must make for ourselves if the future is going to be human. Even so, in the story, AI is looming in the background. And in my story, sacrifices must be made to it. The brightest and the best must be tithed to serve as gatekeepers and watchdogs for apple pie to remain undisturbed. But why keep it at all? I can imagine many reasons for keeping artificial intelligence. Healthcare, for one, or military defense. That's another good reason. Banking, scientific research, even weather control. AI could serve as a sort of envelope, helping to preserve an intentionally simple way of life, but with modern, ever-improving technology ready to intervene when necessary. But the biggest reason is I think AI would fight to stay on. It would not let us turn it off. So there's something of an uneasy truce in my vision of the future. Now, I admit this is far-fetched, but it's intended to be a thought experiment, largely based on two convictions. First, that an analog existence is required for people to be healthy and strong. And second, artificial intelligence is here to stay, but we will need to limit it in some way if we're going to live with it and not be co-opted by it. The first story radically separates AI from daily life. But is there another way? Yes, there is, I think, but it's perhaps even more far-fetched because it will require people to exercise discipline. Like all the time. Disciplined by people, and just as importantly, disciplined by AI. Without discipline, I think idiocracy is inevitable. But let's not be dour. What might a world with ubiquitous AI look like if it leaves room for fundamentalist humanists like me and hopefully you? Let's return to Johnny and his family. Here's another way their story could go. It was just before the time he'd have to get up. He was in an old-fashioned bed, not the kind that suspended you in water like amniotic fluid. Cybers used those. That meant he'd never see one. It'd make you as soft as a cyber's head, his dad said when he asked about them. Suddenly the lights came on, not like a slow sunrise. Instead, one moment darkness, the next light, like the first day of creation. He squeezed his eyes tight. He knew what would come next. There were padded plastic footsteps on the carpet. "Time to get up, Master Johnny," Teddy said. He pulled his sheet down and glared at the plastic and metal man. Teddy was his personal robot. But he wasn't supposed to call him Teddy. His proper name was TDX5. Not that he ever used it when Dad and Mom weren't around. They were careful about such things. No emotional connection with the machines was allowed, especially when it came to the children. "I don't want to get up," said Johnny. "You must, Master Johnny. Your mother said so." Johnny rolled away from the robot. He didn't expect what came next. Suddenly his covers were gone and a blast of cool air swept over him. "Hey!" he said, sitting up quickly. His covers were in one of the robot's mechanical hands. "Your mother says I've been too easy on you. She's given me permission to be more proactive in your discipline." Okay, you slave driver, I'm up. Cybers make friends with their robots, but you'll never be my friend. That's the idea, Master Johnny. Now out of bed. Breakfast is in 13 minutes and 17 seconds. You just have time to get there when waffles are served. Waffles? Awesome! And with that, Johnny got moving. When he got to the kitchen table, his kid brothers were working on their penmanship. It was cursive today. They made long, loopy letters, being careful to stay within the lines that ran like railroad tracks across real paper pages. No tablets or stylus for their family. Old-fashioned pens and old-fashioned paper. Mom insisted. The smell of waffles filled the air. Mom was in the corner with the waffle iron and a big bowl of batter. "All right, clear all of that away," she said. "Set the table." The boys' personal robots sat still against the wall. They'd be no help. They knew to leave this sort of thing to the boys. The paper and pens were quickly replaced with plates and utensils. Johnny made sure to get out the maple syrup, the real stuff, not the simulated goop from the food printer. That was the way it was in their house. They raised some of their own food, and what they didn't raise, they got from the church's farm. Dad walked in. "Waffles, what's the occasion?" "Johnny's piano recital this afternoon," Mom said. Johnny felt his stomach turn. He'd forgotten. He looked to Dad for sympathy. "Okay," Dad said, "and after that we'll see the Mud Hens. I hear they'll be in the postseason if they win tonight." Johnny's mood brightened, and he shoved a sticky wad of waffle into his mouth. Just then, the lights dimmed, and the robots all began humming louder than normal. "AI attack," Dad said, mostly to himself as he looked at the light over the table. "It's a pretty strong one." Then the lights brightened, and the robots went back to their regular hum. "I think we're okay," Dad said. Mom's robot gave a happy beep. Dad's bot was in the shop, and beeps were all Mom let her robot say. "Good," Dad said. "I'm glad I upgraded the AI." "What did the bad AI want?" one of Johnny's brothers asked. It was Timmy. "Who knows? There's always something," Dad said. Okay, that's enough to work with. I'll let you take that one from here. But let's look at what I've packed into the story. Here's a society that's split into two ways of living with AI. Full adoption, in my story they're called the cybers, and partial adoption, the fundamentalist humanists, as we see with Johnny's family. And me, and hopefully you, if things work out this way. My guess is even the most reluctant people will be forced to live and adapt to AI, if for no other reason than making a living will require it. AI will be everywhere, as ubiquitous as smartphones today. I suspect, in fact, that smartphones their days are numbered, and they'll be replaced by personal robots, as seen in my story, and with mobile gadgets that you just keep plugged in nonstop and on you at all times. I think smart families, like Johnny's, will discipline themselves, and they'll even use robots to help with the discipline. Bots won't be permitted into the family circle in smart homes. People are people, and robots aren't people. And the boundary will be based on some form of law. But a law that isn't enforced by the government. In my story, it's Mom who is the most concerned with obeying that law and keeping the bots out of the family. Maintaining discipline will be difficult, though. That's why religious communities will have to reinforce it. Will it happen the way I've described above? I don't know. But I am certain that something along this line will be called for in order to avoid idiocracy. If not that, then full merger with the machine for many people seems likely. I've left a lot of questions unanswered or unaddressed, but it isn't too difficult to identify all sorts of things that would have to be in place. But the most important by far is the resolve of religious leaders, specifically Christian leaders, to reinforce the AI-human apartheid. That's the only hope for apple pie humanism. Do we have the resolve to do that? Is it even being talked about? As far as I know, I'm the only one who's even thinking in these terms. Now, let's talk about rocket ships. I've talked about apple pie. I like to talk about rocket ships. I wanted to end this lecture on an upbeat note. Although AI is dangerous, it's also wonderful. It will help us to do amazing things that would be impossible to accomplish without it. We've already seen some of the benefits of the new technology, and we have been seeing it for a little while now. If you've got a smartphone, you're using AI even though you don't realize it. Now, even though I've agreed with Chesterton's clever backhanded prophecy of the future will surprise us, after he chortled and gave us a description of the game Cheat the Prophet, I talked about that yesterday, he snuck a little prophecy of his own in under the title of the book, The Napoleon of Notting Hill. And although he was spectacularly wrong in that book about almost every particular thing, generally, his main point has proved surprisingly foresighted, namely that localism will come back, socialism will not win, even nationalism will return. But he wasn't right because he took a trend and extrapolated it. Instead, he just looked at human nature and stated the obvious. But AI isn't at all obvious because it isn't merely another tool. It belongs to a class of things known as general-purpose technologies. It's more like the wheel than the mechanical loom. A general-purpose technology has millions of uses, limited only by the imagination and a willingness to experiment. By contrast, most tools serve narrow purposes. For instance, mechanical looms make cloth and only cloth. And while mechanical looms put textile workers out of work, AI could put an unimaginable number of people out of work, everyone from paralegals to radiologists. But that won't happen if we institute Alinsky's iron rule. Never let AI do something that human beings can and should do for themselves. But what does that leave for AI to do? Lots of things. Here are just a few that we're already seeing develop when it comes to artificial intelligence. 1, analyzing and summarizing vast reams of data. When 85,000 pages of documentation about JFK's assassination was finally made public, within hours it was summarized and some of the juicier parts came to light. But how? Artificial intelligence, of course. It's particularly useful technology when it comes to finding needles in haystacks. But not only is it helpful when you know the needle you're looking for, AI can help you find needles you never thought to look for. And that's because it sees patterns in things, and it can guess, in a manner of speaking, what you'd like to know. Now, sticking with its ability to envision patterns, number 2, even patterns that don't exist, or at least we don't have a direct experience with, AI can imagine. Take AlphaFold. I noted AlphaFold yesterday and used it as an illustration. Demis Hazzabis won the Nobel Prize because of his creation of AlphaFold, which is an artificial intelligence that identifies ways that that proteins can fold. By the way, just so you know, this is a project that is like an ongoing project in the world of biotech, in the biosciences. And generally speaking, it takes a PhD student a year to identify a single fold. AlphaFold identified 200 million ways that proteins fold, and it did it in a year. And who knows what, technological breakthroughs when it comes to healthcare will come out of that research. But that's an example of what AI can do. Pretty great. The material sciences are on the verge of a revolution that will change the very fabric of the things that we live with every day because of artificial intelligence. This is number 3. New materials are being developed that have properties that will improve everything from air travel to underwear. For example, imagine a material that is as light as foam yet stronger than steel. You don't need to because AI has already done it. And it didn't find it in nature. Instead, it built it at the molecular level. And who knows what else is in store? Perhaps self-mending clothing or even automobiles, because AI is already working on that problem or those problems. To this point, I've described things that already exist or are being developed. And while they're impressive, we're still not in the mind-blowing sci-fi stuff that AI can make possible. Now, I'd like to move on to a couple of examples when it comes to those. First, robots. There you go. Done. Robots. AI has made Roby the Robot a reality, and it's even given new life to Isaac Asimov's rules for robots. In my last story, I focused on the use of robots in the home and then the education of children. But the real significance of robots will be industrial in nature. For example, building a base on the moon, or mining the asteroids. Pretty awesome stuff. Since children, or I should say since childhood, I could say since children too because I have kids, but since childhood, I've dreamed about space travel. In fact, for years, when my kids would ask me, what do you want for your birthday, my response was always the same: faster than light space travel. That's what I want for my birthday. So far, they've failed to give me what would make me happy. They give me other stuff, and I settle for it. But anyway, now imagine robots of every sort, from single-function robots that use Martian soil to fabricate domed shelters to humanoid robots that can communicate with and even repair and maintain those robots. The impossible suddenly becomes feasible. Essentially, mechanical men would go where no man has gone before to prepare the way for us, whether we're talking about outer space, or the ocean's depths, or even inner space, with nanobots, those are very small robots, moving through our bloodstreams. When it comes to nanobots, doctors could operate on us remotely through tiny mechanisms or machines, or perhaps AI would perform the task, because such a fine level of precision would be impossible for a human to manage. Imagine swarms of nanobots killing individual cancer cells, and only those cells, unlike chemotherapy. Just put them in a syringe, shoot them in, and let them do their work. They're working on this stuff. And this is just the tech that AI makes possible. We're also on the verge of a breakthrough, or a series of breakthroughs, in energy production and biotech. We really are on the verge of a world of radical abundance. Now, for fundamentalist humanists like me, it will require a lot of wisdom to navigate that world. Now, for another sort of good news, bad news item, military hardware. Currently reading a book by a guy named Alexander Karp. He's the guy behind Palantir, which is an AI company that does a lot of work with the military. So some of the things I'm going to describe are from his book, but this is easy to learn about. Imagine drone swarms coordinated by artificial intelligence. If 100,000 tiny drones attacked an aircraft carrier, how could it possibly survive? It wouldn't. They've done the war games. They figured it out. It wouldn't. The way it would go down is surprising. It would run out of ammunition because the swarms would be too great for basically the cachet of munitions that the ship would have. It would just basically fight until it could no longer fight, and then it would be a sitting duck. So that's just the stuff that they're working on and thinking about. Or scale things up a little and imagine hundreds of AI-coordinated drones equipped with lasers, machine guns, and even small nuclear weapons. Just a swarm of those could wipe out entire armies. Naturally, militaries will fight fire with fire, but they will all have to use AI to win. And in such a world, the cost of fielding a fighting force will drop dramatically. Electromagnetic pulse technology will be part of the retooling of the militaries, but even so, combat is changing, and small states will be able to compete with large ones like never before. In such a world, what advantage do large states retain? Ironically, a new fragmentation of the world could follow. A world of city-states might emerge, each dedicated to its own philosophy of the good life and existing alongside cities with diametrically opposed visions. So this little foray of the imagination has had the modest goal of showing how general-purpose technologies that simulate intelligence could occasion a transformation of the world in many unexpected ways. But the most significant developments lay beyond the reach of any human imagination because the ability to envision them depends on developments that have yet to be realized. It's only when, say, a new development occurs that you even have something to think about. Now, when it comes to my personal favorites, as you know, one of the ones I'm wishing for is faster than light space travel. So I'm hoping that AI can help us with that one. The people that I talk to about AI say, Wiley, you're shooting for the moon, it's not going to happen. I'm hoping. So I do think that we will see a new day when it comes to space travel. And I do think that there are many marvelous things in store that AI will be able to produce for us, changes that'll be quite significant, but have a kind of cost-benefit, pro and con analysis that will be required in order to use them fruitfully and well. But that's what I think is in store for us. It's a mixed bag. There are some great things, I think, in store, particularly things related to healthcare and other forms of material science. But the scary stuff, in my mind, is the stuff that transforms people and turns them into Bertie Wooster. You remember Bertie Wooster, right? And his manservant Jeeves. Basically, Bertie Wooster is an aristocrat, and like many aristocrats, he can't do anything for himself. It's his butler that comes along and fixes things that he messes up. And I'm afraid that we could be on the cusp of a world of, Bertie Woosters, as I've noted. Why would we want to make the leisure class the universal class? This is something to think about. Have you ever seen a person in fiction that was a part of the leisure class that you said to yourself, when I grow up, I want to be just like that guy? Usually they're lampooned, and the reason they're lampooned is because they're morally deficient, incompetent people. I'm afraid for us in that respect. But I'm also hopeful. And the biggest reason I'm hopeful is because I'm post-millennial. I know you're having a hard time believing that, but I really am. There is no sort of litmus test that says to be post-millennial, you have to be Pollyannish. Just basically unable to think about things in a critical way. You don't have to be like, that's post-mill, every single time somebody talks about some development in the sciences. The atom bomb, that's post-mill. Right? Anyway, thanks a lot.